Hey everyone, Robert here with Odd Random Thoughts, and today I want to talk a little bit about SSH. We talked about securing it a little bit in the Ultimate Ubuntu Server Security guide that I posted here a little while back. But in that video, we just changed the port number and assigned listen addresses and stuff. But a lot of people, and the best security for SSH, of course, is secure keys. RSA keys. You have a public and a private key. The public key resides on the server that you want to access, and then the private key is held on the machine that you're using to access that server with, and they authenticate with each other. So that prevents a lot of brute force attempts. It also makes your server very secure, because unless you have that private key on your machine, there's no way that you can access the server through SSH. So here's the deal on this one is a lot of people usually will have their server environment set up or their test lab or whatever, and they're using a Windows machine to access their servers by using Putty. And that's the case for me as well. So it's a little bit different if you're going to use SSH RSA keys if you're using a Windows machine to access them. So what I'm going to do today is show you how to create those keys using a little program called Puttygen, and it's part of the Putty project. I'll put the links below in the description of where you can download Putty as well as Puttygen. First thing you want to do, of course, is if you're watching this video, you probably already run Putty and use it to access your servers, but you're also going to need Puttygen. So you would just go to the link below in the description and download Puttygen onto your computer. And I have it here in my Windows machine. And all you want to do to generate your keys is just double click on Puttygen, and it's going to open a window like this. Okay, now it says here no key at this time, but what you want to do is come down here to SSH-2 RSA. That's today's standard for the keys. And I like to move the number of bits up to 4096. That just makes for a more secure key. And if somebody was trying to read your key or hack your key, it would take a lot longer for that to happen with this. Now there's a couple things you can do with RSA keys. You can set a password on them, and if you do that, it's going to require you to enter that password every time you try to connect to your server, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose of RSA keys, because the whole purpose is to prevent having to manually log into your server every time. The only thing the pass key is good for is if you are actually in a production environment, and let's say that you're carrying your private key around on a USB stick so you can just plug in and access your server from anywhere. If somebody steals that USB stick and has access to your key, that passphrase is just going to prevent them from accessing that key and reading its contents until they could actually break the encryption on the password. So it basically just buys you a little bit of time until you can discover, oh, my key is missing, I need to change and generate new keys because somebody's stolen it. So it just kind of helps buy you a little bit of time while you create new keys and stuff. So if this is on a home environment, probably not necessary unless you think somebody's going to steal your key and from your home, but anyway, I choose not to set a passphrase. But what you do now is hit generate, and it'll take it a little bit of time to generate the public and the private key. So we'll we'll let this run here. I'm going to go ahead and pause the video while this generates. Okay, so the key is through generating. If you noticed when it first started up here, it said to move the cursor around in the blank area to generate some randomness. Do that, just kind of move your cursor around like this. It'll help speed up that generation process a little bit, and I think it's kind of partly what helps generate this key. So now that the key is generated, you can put any comment here you want. This one has generated one beforehand. Now you can leave that, or you can highlight this, and we can put in like we could take this off and put YouTube -RSA key, just whatever you want. Now here's where you can put a random passphrase, or one that you want. You can put anything you want in there if you're wanting to use that to secure your key. But like I said before, if you're in a home environment or whatever, it's not really necessary. It just helps buy you a little bit of time, so I'm going to choose not to do that. So now that we have generated these, let's go ahead and save our public key. So we'll hit save. Okay, and then I've got a folder here called SSH. So I'm going to go into that, and that's where I had my Puttygen. So I'm just going to create a new folder, and I'm going to put just call it SSH_keys. Okay, and then I'm going to save my public and private key both in this folder. And you can save them wherever you want. Just remember where you've saved them at, and then you want to name it whatever you want. So this was the public key we're saving, so we'll call this one YouTube_public, and we'll hit save, and then we'll save our private key. It's going to ask us, are you sure you want to save it without a passphrase? And as we discussed already, we're not going to do that for this video, so I'll just hit save, and then we're still in our SSH keys folder, so I'll call this one YouTube_private and hit save. Now you can name those whatever you want, no big deal. Okay, so now we have our keys generated. We'll go into our folder. We have our private key and our public key. So now let's go to our server. This is the YouTube server, the test server that I've been using for all the previous videos, if you've been following along with all of those. So what we want to do, let's go ahead and su into root. So we're going to do sudo su and hit enter, and we'll enter in our password. Okay, so now we're in our home directory. You want to be sure you're in the home directory of the user that you're going to use to access the server. Robert is the one that I use for this server. So first thing we want to do is make a directory. It's going to be a hidden directory. It's going to be mkdir to make directory, and it's going to be .ssh. The dot just signifies that this will be a hidden directory. We'll hit enter. So now if we do a list and a -a, that'll show our hidden directories as well. So there's our .ssh. So let's go into that. So we'll go into the .ssh directory, and then we're going to create a file called authorized keys. So let's just do a nano authorized_keys and hit enter. Okay, now in this file, this is where we're going to paste our public key that we generated. So I forgot to mention too that you need to leave the Puttygen open so you can copy that key. So let's go back to it, and we'll click in this window up here and right click to select all, and then we'll right click and copy, and then we'll go back to our server and just right click, and that will paste the key in that file, and it should start with SSH-RSA and then the AAAA. If it does not start with this, then you may have generated your key wrong. If you picked a different type of encryption or key generation down here, then it may not start with this. It need to be sure it's at SSH2RSA. Okay, so we'll go ahead and write this file and exit. Okay, now let's back up here a directory, and we're gonna list all of our files here. And as we see, our SSH directory is kind of cut off there, folks. Sorry about that. But this is our .ssh directory. And as you can see, its owner and group is at root. So we want to change that to be our user that we use to access this server. So we're going to change the ownership to Robert, or whatever your user is, and then we're going to do we'll do recursively .ssh and hit enter. So now if we go into that directory, we can see our authorized key file is now has ownership of our user. So let's back up again, and what we want to do is we need to change permissions on that SSH directory. So we'll do a chmod 0700.ssh and hit enter. Okay, so now if we look at that, you can see we've read, write, and execute on that directory now, and it's changed the permissions. So now we need to change permissions on our authorized key file. So let's go back in there, and we'll see what they're at right now. Okay, so I believe that's correct. I think that's 644. So let's just make sure. We'll do chmod 0644 authorized keys. So yeah, it was already set to the right permissions, but it never hurts just to make sure. So okay, now we have our authorized key files set up with our key pasted in it, and our permissions and ownership are all correct on it. So now let's go into our sshd config file. So we'll do a nano etc ssh sshd underscore config. Okay, now as you remember, in the previous tutorial on the security, we changed our port, which is something that I advise you doing whether you're using keys or not, and we defined our listen addresses. Now as you remember, we had created an Apache web server with WordPress on this server, so in order for our secure theme installations and updates and all that to work, we also had to define local machine as a listen address. So we've got the server IP and the local machine as our listen addresses. So now that we've got our keys made, first let's test our key just to make sure it's going to work before we disable the password authentication, because if you do that and your key doesn't work, then you'll be locked out of your server, and unless you have console access, then you're going to be kind of doomed. So let's open a new Putty session. Okay, so what you want to do, and you can save sessions in here. You can put either the IP, or if you're using running your own DNS server, you can put the host name, whatever you wish. I've already got my server saved down here. It's the YouTube test server, so we're going to load that configuration. And there's the port 1011 that we had defined here, and our host name for the server. And so what we want to do is to come over here on under connection, click on the data link there, and under auto login, we're going to put our username that we use to log in. So we'll put Robert, And then down here under SSH, we'll go to the auth section, and where it says private key file for authentication, just click on browse. Okay, and then that's going to open up your file finder here in Windows. And we saved them, as you remember, in the SSH directory in the SSH keys folder. So we'll navigate to that, and then we will double click on our private key that we saved. Okay, so that's telling Putty this is where to look for the private key to authenticate with. Then we'll just go back up here to session, and we're going to click save, and that's going to save this configuration under this name, which I've already got it here, but it's just going to overwrite what I already have. So I'll just click save. Okay, so that saves that session. Now let's double click on the name down here, and it will open a new Putty session. And as you can see up here, after opening the new session, it was using the username that we entered in, and it says authenticating with public key, and there's our public key, YouTube RSA key. So it logged in without having to enter our username and password. So our RSA keys are working, so we can go ahead and log out of this new session here that we used to test with. Okay, so now we're back at our Sshd config, so now we can go ahead and make a few adjustments in here. So we'll come down here, and we want to, okay, so we already have permit root login, no, and we did all this in a previous video. So we'll just come down here and uncomment this line where it says authorized key file, and that's saying that it's in our home directory .ssh, and this is the key file. So that's the one we created. So we'll uncomment that. And you want to be sure RSA and pub key authentication are both set to yes. And then we'll go down here, no on empty passwords, challenge response, no, and password authentication down here, we want to uncomment that, and we want to change this to no, because we're no longer going to be using password authentication, we'll use RSA keys. So then let's come down here to the bottom of the file, and we're going to add a couple lines just for added security. We'll put in allow users, and then we'll put any usernames that are allowed to access the server with that private key. So and this will work for if you're using regular password authentication as well, but we're just going to allow Robert since that's the only one that we're using. Now here's something else to keep in mind. If you are running WordPress with secure theme installations, you want to be sure and allow the user that you created for that SSH session. And I think we did, I can't remember what our user was exactly, but if you had, when you created yours, if you did like WordPress-user for that secure SSH session, then you'd want to add it as well. And keep in mind too, you would want to leave PAM enabled if you are authenticating with your WordPress installation in that manner. If you are not using it PAM to authenticate with any other service, then you would want to set this to no if you're just using it for regular SSH logins only. But in this case, since we have the WordPress SSH keys set up, we're going to leave PAM authentication to yes. Otherwise, you're going to start getting fails on your updates and stuff. So then we'll also just add in max auth tries, and we'll set it to 3. Now we also had installed fail to ban on this, which is monitoring our SSH sessions for brute force and all that stuff. So this isn't totally necessary, but I like to add the added layer of security. So that is pretty much all we need to do in here. Just remember PAM authentication you would want to set to no if you're only using SSH logins just for terminal. If you're using it to authenticate another service on your server, then you'd want to leave that to yes. But otherwise, that's all we need to do in here. So we'll just write that file and exit, and then we'll go ahead and restart SSH. And hit enter. Okay. So now we have everything completed, I believe. We can start a new session now, and we'll double click on our YouTube test server. Sorry y'all, my window's popping up on my other screen there, but I'll drag it over. You can see here that we logged in, username Robert, and we authenticated with our public key, and now password logins, password authentication is disabled. Nobody will be able to log in using a password and their username anymore. They will only be able to access the server if they have the private key that authenticates with the public key on the server. So I hope this wasn't too long and drawn out, but that's all you have to do to get SSH keys working. If you're using Putty on a Windows machine, you can also set this up if you're using another Linux server or a Linux machine to access. You can do that by generating your keys on the machine, and then you would transfer your public key over to your server. But anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to doing the next video. And y'all take care for now, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you dig what I'm doing. Y'all have a great day. Bye-bye.